Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in this week. Got a great episode for you. Before I introduce the guest, as always, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It helps boost the show, grow the audience, and ultimately helps me create the best podcast for you guys. Additionally, please go follow me on social media, ROYBTZ on Instagram and ROY_BNTZ on Twitter. On Twitter, if you go to my profile page, you can go directly to the newsletter and subscribe. That'll give you access to updates, occasional blog posts, news about guests, and the future of the show. And most importantly, it's just an easy way for you to get the podcast into your inbox week in and week out. Finally, please consider supporting this independent podcast. I currently do not work with any ads, any companies, so I don't promote anything. I'm trying to keep this as independent as possible. So if you see value in the podcast, please show your support and support this independent podcast. Finally, if you are looking to start your own podcast, I have a full tutorial that's out, and I will be sure to link it in the show notes. It covers everything you need to know about how and why to start a podcast. So if this is something you're interested in, again, check the show notes. It's there. All right, on to the guest. This week I have Michael Markesbery. Michael is the founder and CEO, co-founder, I should say, and CEO of Oros. And the secret sauce in Oros is that they have created a different type of insulation. It's their own proprietary thing. It's called Solar Core, which is made out of Aerogel. And if you want to know what those things are, listen to the podcast. Michael explains everything. So I love jackets. I love the outdoors, as anyone listening to this podcast would know. So naturally, I love outdoor apparel and gear. And I was interested because I saw this a while back, and it just didn't seem reasonable that such a thin jacket could support you and keep you warm in such, sub-zero temperatures. And I was just interested to learn more about the company, about Michael, about what he sees as the future of insulation, and how they've managed to come up with solution to what he calls the bulkiness, the Michelin Man. Anyone that's been in really cold temperatures has experienced this, the massive jacket that you can barely put your hands down. So this is a fascinating conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure you guys will as well. So without further ado, let me introduce this week's guest, Michael Markesbery. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
All right, and we are live. Michael, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Roy, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm glad we could get it done. I've been watching your company for many years. I think I probably saw it originally on Instagram or something, and I was like, "Oh, this looks interesting." And so I've been following, and I'm glad you could come on the podcast and we can talk about it, you and the company.
Awesome. I'm happy to be here.
So for the not the viewers, but the listeners who are listening and may not know you, can you give us a little bit of an intro about who you are?
Yeah, of course.
Your background?
I'm Michael Markesbery, the co-founder and CEO of Oros. We are a material technology company that creates the most advanced scientific thermal materials on the planet. And if you want, can jump into my the founder story and kind of how we got here.
Yeah, would love to hear that.
Cool. So I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Ohio, and I went to a school in Oxford, Ohio, called Miami University. And my sophomore year of college, I went backpacking across Europe. Ended up climbing the tallest mountain in the Northeast Swiss Alps. Incredible experience. One really big problem. I'm on top of the mountain and I look just like the Michelin Man.
Yeah.
And I'm a science geek at heart. And back in school, they were teaching us about, the CRISPR-Cas9 gene system, like we were editing human genomes.
Okay.
Space tourism at the time wasn't a reality, but was close to being, and certainly is, there today. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at all these industries, and they were all evolving at this rapid pace. And I guess the thing that didn't make sense to me is it looked like this one wasn't, because the jacket that I was wearing was insulated with animal byproducts or goose down.
Mm-hmm.
Same stuff we've been using for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it didn't make sense to me that all these other industries were evolving at this rapid pace, and this one of insulation or thermal materials wasn't. It made no sense to me. I thought that there had to be a better way to cut the bulk and still stay warm. And so I came back to the U.S. kind of obsessed with that problem and did my research and looked basically across every application or industry to find a solution for this problem, this Michelin Man problem I had.
Yeah.
And every thermal material in the world operated under the same premise, where it needed, bulk or loft or airspace to work.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really bulky. And so there was no real way to solve the problem. And the more interesting thing to me was, you'd think with like all the bulky materials we were using to insulate things, that we were, doing a good job managing thermal energy, but we're not. Global energy consumption rising 1.5% a year, of which 50% is thermal energy. 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions are thermal energy related. So even though like we're using like really bulky and lots of insulation materials to insulate things, we're still not doing a good job managing thermal energy. So this whole industry, when I learned all this, was like, oh my gosh, super antiquated. Long story short, thermal materials were letting us down and just incredibly overlooked. So I thought like, hey, maybe if we could solve this Michelin Man problem, we could solve some of these bigger problems as well. And I got really lucky, ended up learning about, I got a scholarship from the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, which started by an incredible group of astronauts. And through that scholarship, I learned about this NASA technology called Aerogel. Mm-hmm. NASA said that this aerogel tech was the lowest thermal conductive solid in existence, or the best insulation in the world.
What is it? Good. What does it consist of, aerogel?
Awesome question. So aerogel isn't necessarily a substance or a material. It's more of a process. Said another way, you can make aerogel out of a lot of different things, whether it's a polymer or copper or zinc, or the most common is amorphous silica, which is the same stuff that's in like glass and sand and all that stuff. But aerogel is more of a process where you basically remove, the substance becomes 99% air, or 98.9% air. And with that air, you have this material that does an amazing job preventing conduction, especially thermal conduction. So it's more of a process rather than it is a specific type of material. The way that you used to conduct that process was called supercritical drying, really high heat, really high pressure, so you could remove, you could create that amount of air. More recently, though, there's been a lot of progress towards ambient conditions, or being able to operate that in that same process without the need for supercritical drying.
So many questions. So I guess NASA obviously uses this in their materials. Is it, I don't know, is it clothing for astronauts? Is it insulation inside the, the whatever it is that they use? Like, what do they use it for?
Awesome question. So NASA's used it for a couple of different applications. Most relevant is they use it to insulate a majority of the Mars rovers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So space really cold, close to absolute zero, right? Like negative 455 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever that is.
That's chilly.
Yeah, pretty cold. And so they needed insulation for the Mars rovers and did that. They've had some other uses, capturing space dust, which gives some other properties that aerogel has, less related to thermal. In a couple other applications, but the big one was used on the Mars rovers for insulation.
And then what material, because you said the aerogel is actually just the process, but and you said that you can use a bunch of different materials. What materials do you guys use in the jackets?
Yeah, so we use the exact same base material that NASA used on the Mars rovers, which is that amorphous silica.
Okay.
That I referenced.
So that's sand?
Well, it's this same base element that's in sand and glass, right? So they both have silica in them, just as this specific type of aerogel does as well.
But where would you get this material from?
Yeah, so amorphous silica aerogel created in the early 1930s. So the original intellectual property on amorphous silica aerogel long since expired. So amorphous silica aerogel is pretty widely produced across the world. Getting your hands on it is not the hard challenge. So there's a variety of producers. The hard challenge with amorphous silica aerogel, and the reason this incredible technology that has the opportunity to not just solve the Michelin Man problem I had, but these global problems as well around thermal energy usage. You'd think it's been adopted widely, this technology would be adopted everywhere. Not the case. The reason why is amorphous silica aerogel is super brittle. Mm-hmm. If you poke it, it shatters into 1,000 little pieces.
Oh, wow.
Really bad news bears for almost every application.
Yeah.
And so that was the problem that we ran into at Oros when we first got our hands on this incredible technology. Getting our hands on it was the easy part. So we spent 2 years, our sophomore years of college to our senior years, maniacally obsessed with that problem of how do you take the best insulation in the world, this aerogel stuff, mm-hmm. and just make it not brittle, so you can use it across a wide variety of applications, including apparel. And by our senior years of college, we ended up creating the first flexible and durable aerogel composite in the world. And that's called Solar Core. And that's what powers all of our gear today.
So Solar Core is your proprietary, I don't know, whatever you would call it, proprietary thing that you've developed?
That's correct. So we're fortunate to have patents on Solar Core. And again, what makes Solar Core unique is, this most popular form of aerogel, amorphous silica, while it's an amazing insulation, best insulation on Earth, is super brittle. So you were very limited in the use case. And it's a perfect solution to solve all the problems that we were talking about earlier, including my own experience of the Michelin Man. We needed to make it not brittle so that you could actually use it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did with Solar Core. And Solar Core is an incredible technology because it's warmer than every insulation we've tested. I think we've tested over 350 to date. And it's warmer than all of them in typical standard test methods. I think we use ASTM C518 for those curious. And that's great. It's warmer than all the other insulations out there.
Yeah.
But the real value proposition gets back to that problem that I had when I looked like the Michelin Man on top of the mountain, really bulky. Yeah. It's back to the same problem that every thermal material has had since the beginning of time, which is bulk, loft, airspace. We need volume for this stuff to work. That is not true with Solar Core. Solar Core under compression 15 psi, basically no volume, maintains 97% of the thermal performance it had pre-compression.
Wow.
Said another way, for the first time in history, you can have a thin amount of insulation that actually delivers thermal performance.
Okay.
That's the really big difference. No longer is there this dependency on volume and bulk in order to provide thermal value. For the first time in history, less is warm. That's the real difference. And so what it means for the Oros Apparel brand is no more bulky Michelin Man. You can have a long sleeve shirt that keeps you warm sub-freezing. But the applications are pretty endless from that perspective. At some point, we should talk about some of the work we do with the Department of Defense and all that. But that's the real value proposition of SolarCore.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions. So I guess for years they focused the outdoors industry focused on weight, not bulk necessarily, right? Because they have gotten things, jackets, even the big ones, to I don't know, a handful of grams, right? Like they're pretty, and they can fit into like the pocket, but no one focused on the bulk, and that's how you guys differentiate from the average, Patagonia, TNF, Marmot, et cetera, et cetera.
1,000%. And I would say one more thing as well.
Sure.
Getting back to less is warm and what that really means. The warm is clear. And the less, to your point, is clear as well. Yes, to your point, it's less bulk, but it has so much more meaning than that. It's less layers. It's less materials. It's less consumption. And in the process of having a more efficient thermal system, we have the opportunity to solve some of these bigger problems as well. We have the opportunity to severely mitigate the amount of thermal energy that we need for humanity. And so there's a lot of power in that word, yet less. And it really gets into Oros's approach on sustainability.
The fashion industry is highly unsustainable. I remember I was watching something recently, and the amount of things that get thrown into landfills, into the ocean, the microplastics, all the different stuff. It's one of the most wasteful industries. And if there's a product that, whatever it is, if your jacket takes half the amount of, things to produce versus a Patagonia, it's a no-brainer. But I'm interested because I have not tried the jacket. It looks great. It really does. And I love jackets. I love outdoors gear and apparel. But I think for me, and this is, I would love to get your take as far as, educating the consumer. I look at it, I'm like, there's absolutely no way. And again, I have not tried this. This is just visual through looking at the website. I'm like, there's no way this can warm me the same as one of those Michelin Man jackets that's supposed to warm you on top of Everest, right? So how do you get past that hurdle?
It's an awesome question. There is a lot of consumer education involved, for better or worse, in terms of convincing a consumer of exactly that proposition. There's certainly an early adopter curve of people who are excited to buy in to that value proposition, and certainly our target consumer. But educating the consumer on the value is a big part of our ad spend from a dollars perspective. You're absolutely right. I think what we found is once we convert a consumer, the lifetime value of that consumer is pretty incredibly high, which is incredibly beneficial for the community and the company that we're building.
Yeah. Because essentially it's, I'm trying to think of a parallel for something else. but anyway, like if you look at the jacket, it's essentially, it looks like a mid layer of what we know as a mid layer. But you guys are saying that it works just as the bulkiest jacket known to man, like a big mountaineer jacket that's supposed to take you up there. Have you guys? I mean, I guess you've obviously tested it, but I'm just interested like where you've tested this, and B, like have you do you work with like any mountaineers or ice climbers or like adventurous type athletes where they can attest to this?
Great questions. So a couple of things. One, I think at Oros, we're not a fan of the word layer. Our goal and the original vision for the brand Oros Apparel, from a technology and a product perspective, was this audacious goal of creating a long sleeve shirt that could keep a consumer warm, sub-freezing.
Mm-hmm.
So not just thinner and warmer outerwear, but removing the entirety of the bulk and layers involved in the process of staying warm.
So in New York City in winter, I could wear a shirt, just one long sleeve shirt.
That is 100% the technological vision at Oros.
Wow.
To do that, you've got to rethink how insulation, and especially insulation in apparel, is done.
Yeah.
You can't just put something inside of a jacket, whether goose down or even our current technology, solar core, and put it in the jacket and hope for the best.
Yeah.
You've got to rethink insulation, and the fiber of the long sleeve shirt itself needs to be that insulation, and it needs to be an incredibly warm fiber, the warmest fiber on earth. The problem with creating that fiber is, if you remember, Amorphous Silica Aerogel, super brittle. So if you put it on a fiber in any meaningful capacity, the fiber becomes super brittle.
Mm-hmm.
So the vision of that fiber seemed very impossible to achieve.
Yeah.
At least that was until 2 years ago. With some really incredible partnerships with the Department of Defense and others, we ended up creating the first fiber sample using a newer form of aerogel. And that fiber, at least of all the fibers we've tested, is the warmest fiber on Earth. Can't talk a lot more about it today, but the point is, if we were just another outerwear brand, I don't think that we'd be here today.
So your insulation, like as a proprietary, something you could license to other companies, right? Like a Gore-Tex, for example, where you could license this to North Face, Patagonia, etc. Is that the aim, or do you just want to be Oros and not license this out?
I don't think the Oros apparel brand will ever go away. But Oros at itself, and the heartbeat of the company, is Oros Labs.
Okay.
And Oros Labs is where we create the most advanced thermal materials on the planet.
I see.
All against the vision of solving these big global challenges that we referenced, right? Mm-hmm. Of thermal energy usage and thermal materials. The Oros apparel brand is the purest manifestation of less is warm. It is a validator for our technology. Every person in our product, every ad, every time someone sees someone in our product, it speaks volumes around the validity of the technology platform that we're creating. but we are a material technology company, and our technology is provided to a series of partners, including the United States Department of Defense and some other clients as well. I don't think that we'll ever sell to another apparel brand, the technology, but the other markets are very wide open, and markets that we're fortunate to be partnered in.
Why wouldn't you sell it to other companies? I'm just interested.
I think it cannibalizes the Oros Apparel brand. But for example, Solarcore currently powers some of the footwear, insulated footwear for LL Bean and Cabela's, powered by Solarcore on the insulated winter footwear. So the consumer market as a whole is a pretty large opportunity to transform thermal materials. But the Oros Apparel brand is kind of that shining beacon, the purest definition of less is more.
Yeah. I'm interested because if I wear, so let's say, this is February in New York and it's, whatever, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm wearing just a regular insulated down jacket. And what it does obviously is it captures the warm air, and that's what warms up my body. But then I go inside, let's say to a bar, immediately I get hot, right? Because all that air that's captured in my body just warms me up. And now the place that I'm in is warm, have to take off the jacket immediately. How does this act or react when moving from such drastic, weathers from like 10 to 50 or whatever it is in a split second? Like, does it react the same as a down or a synthetic down would, or completely different?
It's a beautiful question. We need to talk about both our current technology, Solarcore,
sure,
as well as the fiber that we're developing. With the current technology, Solarcore, we need to look at the competition and how they tackle the breathability problem, starting with Goose Down. Goose Down, as its own material, is very breathable, or decently breathable.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is when you put it in a garment, the fabric surrounding Goose Down needs to be very tightly woven such that it prevents the down from escaping.
Yeah.
And with those tightly woven fabrics, you're drastically cutting down on the breathability or airflow of that garment, which is why you have that reaction of, you're at a good temperature, and then you get into an environment that's drastically different, and if it's warmer, you start overheating.
Yeah,
it's because of that prevention of breathability. Synthetics, on the other hand, certainly don't have that challenge, and so you're able to, for lack of a better term, loosen the woven or the knit structure surrounding that insulation on a synthetic insulation, thereby creating the needed airflow or breathability. Solarcore fits into that category. We don't need to worry about the migration, is the technical term, the migration of Solarcore like you do with Goose Down. Mm-hmm. So we're able to have really breathable fabrics surrounding Solarcore, the current technology. And then Solarcore itself is breathable, roughly the 40 CFM or cubic feet per minute of airflow on Solarcore itself. So Solarcore.
How is that comparable to like a synthetic, for example?
It depends. It's probably in the upper quartile, I'd say, of outdoor insulations from a breathability perspective.
Okay. Wow.
There are going to be some that are more breathable, some that are less. But net Solarcore is a pretty breathable insulation. And then the bonus is we don't have to worry about those challenges of migration that you would with Goose Down, thereby allowing us to create a pretty innately breathable product with the current Solarcore technology, avoiding a lot of the circumstances that you just mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So that's how we tackle that problem with solar core. With the fiber, it is all about knit structure. So just because you have a really warm fiber, you know, you have a lot of flexibility and control as you knit that fiber up. You can choose how loose the knit is. You can choose the type of knit it is. You can choose how tightly woven it is. And all those things factor into breathability. A lot of other factors as well, right? Like haptic hand feel. So it's within that minutia of control of the knit structure that we encourage breathability in the right areas and more insulation in the others. And I've done a good amount of studies on the human body, and every body's different. And but where the body generally produces more heat for sweat, and male bodies are different than female bodies from that perspective as well. But holistically have structured our garments for the fiber technology around that premise of maximizing breathability while maintaining insulation.
Dude, I remember I was trying to like draw a parallel earlier, but I remember when I got my first iPhone, like my mind was blown. I was like, this thing could, like, it's got internet, like just it does all these things. I can, there's Facebook. Like I took me a while to like get my head around it. It was just such a new thing because before I would have the flip phone forever. And this is similar. Like so for example, moved out to Denver 6 months or so ago. A lot of outdoors activity, right? Like I'm climbing 13ers, I'm going in elevation. I plan to do a lot of 14ers this summer, snowboarding, skiing, et cetera, et cetera. If this jacket can keep me warm at those elevations where now I'm like 4 or 5 layers deep, and I got the big hoodie on, and I feel like I'm going to have one of those same moments where it was just like, like mind blown. I can't believe this is doing that. It would be on par for me.
100%. That's the visceral reaction that we are 100% after. Our view, and I can't understate it, is this industry of thermal materials, for whatever reason, is incredibly antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of solving this problem of the Michelin Man look and what it means on a global scale from both a thermal material usage perspective and a thermal energy perspective is immense. And we are honored and excited to be bringing a solution to the table to tackle those problems.
I feel like that's why it's so important to. I sometimes I'll hear like people mock or belittle things like what Elon Musk is doing or Jeff Bezos or any things that any Mars or things that have to do with outer planet journeys, expeditions, adventures. But a lot of the technology that we use today, it's stuff that NASA originally created. And I'm sure you guys aren't the first company to use, technology created by NASA for consumer apparel, or not maybe apparel, but consumer products, right?
100%. Look at Velcro. Look at microwaves.
Oh, really? Velcro? I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Less cool, but look at Tang. NASA has been a phenomenal outlet for technology that ends up going to the commercial market. And I think there's case study after case study of that. I think you're 100% right. And I'd even open that up to government as a whole. There's a lot of reports or documents saying that government was the first VC or venture capital firm, whether that be grants or, other types of partnerships with defense. And I mean, you talk about Elon. I think that's certainly the case, both at Tesla and SpaceX. After his fourth launch at SpaceX, the one that ended up working, that's when he got the phone call from NASA for the, I don't remember the exact dollar amount, but $1 billion contract, which certainly allowed SpaceX to be successful. And at Tesla, I think pretty early on they had a pretty big loan from the government as well that allowed them to succeed. So I'd say I'd broaden it beyond NASA and go to the benefits of U.S. government as a whole.
Yeah, the man is a genius. I saw you tweeted out today, or today or yesterday, that Tesla could be like 10 different startups because a lot of the internal things that they've developed over time could easily spawn off and spin off and be its own company. And that's, and then I think yesterday they raised, I forget what the valuation was, but over $1 billion for the Boring Company. They raised like $500 million. So the man is he's an amazing person. I love the guy.
Yeah. Very unique individual. It seems like, to say the least.
Yeah. So what's the process? You figure out solar core, right? Took you about 2 years in R&D. And then now you have to start a company, right? Like what's the process to take us through that journey?
Yeah. I wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
I never thought I would start a company. It was never my intent. And looking back, there was certainly this grand vision of the big problem of thermal materials and thermal energy, and it started with solving the Michelin Man thing, and but it was a crazy dream, and it was constant problem solution, or said another way, step-by-step process, right? I was on the mountain and had that problem and came back to the US and couldn't find a solution until I was fortunate enough to get the Astronaut Scholarship, and through that learned about Aerogel, and then ran into the other problem of it was brittle. And so then we made it not brittle.
Yeah.
And then we ran into the next problem of, gosh, we don't have any money. We needed to get basically the minimum viable product, or beta, of our technology, our first jackets, out into the world. And we weren't able to afford what's called MOQs, or minimum order quantity, which is when you work with the vendor, the person manufacturing your goods. They're not just going to manufacture like 2 or 5 or 10, right? You got to have a certain minimum.
Yeah.
That minimum was 1,000 jackets, and I think the cost on the jackets was $100. So you do the math; we needed $100,000 in order to afford MOQ, which 2 kids from the Midwest we didn't have. So we ended up running a Kickstarter campaign as we were graduating college. And for the jackets to afford the MOQ, and the goal was $100,000. And in the first 36 hours, we hit $125,000, more money than we've ever seen before in our lives. And
wow,
that was the start of Oros, and closed at like 300 something. And it was a really exciting time. And I think that's when we got our first kind of validation that we might be onto something. And so that was the next problem solution set, kind of to get us to where we are today. But my point in bringing all that up is the whole journey's been problem solution. Sciencing the shit out of whatever you do. You have a hypothesis, and you test it, and either you're right or you're wrong, and you adjust accordingly along the way.
So that must have been a massive boost in confidence to get that money from Kickstarter. Because as you said, like, that's a pat on the back. That's like, oh, people like what we're doing and they're willing to pay for it. Let's run with it.
it was good because it gave us traction, which
Yeah.
then allowed us to go raise a seed round, which is the next problem solution set, right? Um, and so it was good from that perspective. But also, candidly, it was I think it was really good for our parents as well, less about the money, but more about the PR
Yeah.
that came around that. Because when you tell your parents as you're graduating college, hey, I'm not going to go to med school, I'm going to go start a business, they don't get too excited about that. It's not a positive moment. So I think that PR though was very it's like aloe on a sunburn. It was very alleviating, I think,
Yeah.
to them for that. So there were multiple benefits with the Kickstarter for sure.
How much have you guys raised in total to date?
Oh gosh, over I believe over $20 million of venture capital.
Wow.
Um, that we've raised. Yes,
That's awesome.
and phenomenal partners that we're honored to have around the table as well. So.
Have you guys ever entertained like opening I know you guys are in Portland now, right? The headquarters?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you ever entertained the thought of opening like a brick and mortar, or is that not something you're really interested in?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We had brick and mortar, and then there was this global pandemic.
I heard of it. I heard about it.
That came along. So that was a unique experience for sure.
How are you guys affected? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no. In some ways positive and in some ways negative. And it's horrible to say positive, with the effects of COVID on the world. But there was this unique, like a year into COVID, this unique kind of global feeling where people wanted to reconnect. And when you spend so much time indoors, it seemed like people had a need to get back outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this unique moment in time in COVID where the outdoor industry as a whole was on fire. Golf club sales at an all-time high. Outdoor apparel sales at an all-time high. And I think it was driven by this human need of being cooped inside for so long. There was this drive to get outside, whether for nature bathing, like emotional reprieve or spiritual reprieve or whatever, and that was very beneficial, of course, for Oros Apparel, the apparel brand from that perspective. But there are certainly negatives as well. COVID, macroeconomic effects on supply chain and supply chain air freight costs for having to air freight units, and freight as a whole drastically jumping up in expenses. So I think there's positives and negatives in terms of how it affected Oros as a business, for sure.
I almost think that that this COVID thing was almost like our 60s. Like in the 60s, like so many things happened, right? A lot of bad, a lot of good. And same with COVID, a lot of bad, a lot of good. I think, and it is weird saying that good about COVID, because obviously, a lot of people died, but there was a shift. People, like for example, I wouldn't be in Denver probably right now without COVID, right? And a lot of people started to think outside the box of, oh, wait, I don't have to be right next to the office, or I don't have to pay this exorbitant amount in living in this apartment in the city that I don't really want to live, and I can live closer to nature and still make money. And so there's like, just for example, I live in a building now that has 200 apartments. If I had to guess, and I haven't met anyone, but I've met maybe half the people so far, 90% of the people are not from Denver. They are people from Chicago, from LA, from New York, from Boston, DC. So there's been a massive exodus from a lot of these big cities and just a shift in how people communicate, how people work, how people want to live. Like it gave people kind of like maybe a moment to breathe because collectively the whole world had to stop, right? And then when you stop and you're in your apartment all day, a lot of people by themselves, maybe not with a significant other or family, like, well, this sucks. I don't want to be alone. I don't know anybody in the city. Maybe I should live closer to family. Maybe I should think about how I want to live my life. So there is still something that happened in the past few years. That's interesting.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. The point being, yes, brick and mortar experiences. We're launching several this fall. New York, Chicago, a couple other locations as well. It's a great place to build awareness for the technology, for the brand, and to build a community of people that support and believe in what we're doing and building.
You guys should open one in Denver. This is the outdoors mecca.
I totally agree. We're looking at it. Denver's an awesome place. Actually, I'll be there in a month or so, and we should get together when I'm there.
100%.
Cool.
All right. Before I let you go, just I'm interested. So you essentially started this company kind of right out of college, right? Do you think there is an advantage to that naivete maybe that a young person has, that they don't know what the struggles of an entrepreneurship is, and they kind of just can roll into a company and say, I can do this, I can take on the world. And then maybe when you're in your 30s or 40s, that kind of disappears because, you take a beating such as you do in life. I'm just interested to get your, because it's one thing to want to start a company and it's another thing to be the CEO, right? Now you run a company, you have to make hard decisions, you have to pay people. It's completely different once you get into that role, right?
Yeah, I think you're making a great point. I think, a lot of, for better or worse, to take on a vision like we've taken on at Oros, and it's not just me, it's the whole team collectively in the mindset that we've adopted. A lot of hubris is needed.
Yeah.
To take that approach holistically, and we have a lot of questions in our interview process that make sure that there's an alignment of values there. But I think back to your kind of question is, I do think in a lot of ways there is bliss in ignorance. You not always knowing what you don't know gives you the opportunity to maybe approach a problem in a different way than someone who might know a lot more than you do.
Yeah.
If we were in the industry, or if we really knew outdoor apparel really well, say for example, we might have just thought of a better way to do goose down. If we were in the home building insulation market, might have thought of a better way to do mineral wool. And so I think, to your point, having the ignorance might have allowed us to approach the problem in a different way than we would have otherwise.
Yeah, it's super interesting. All right, Michael, I know you got to go. So this was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the pod today.
Thanks, Roy. This is awesome.
Yeah, man. Where's the best place for people to find you?
www.orosapparel.com is the website. And my email is michael@orosapparel.com.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And again, Mike, thanks so much today.
Thanks, Roy.